Okay, so let's get on with the seminar. Here's Chris Hipkins, and here's Mr. Luxon. And today we're being obedient to the PM and the Leader of the Opposition. Why? Because they've both exhorted New Zealanders to discuss co-governance. So give yourselves a clap for being a people who are being obedient to your Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. So this is what Mr. Hipkins said about co-governance.
Come over here.
Prime Minister, co-governance came up again at Ratana yesterday. You've spoken about confusion about what the term means, and the others are misinterpreting it to raise fear. Does the government have some responsibility for that, for not explaining it properly, and what will you do to address that?
Look, as I said yesterday, co-governance can mean different things in different situations. We should have a mature discussion about it, not one that's informed by bumper sticker slogans. We should make sure that we're informing New Zealanders what we're doing and why we are doing it. As I indicated yesterday, the last National Government entered a multitude of co-governance arrangements during their time in office. And in fact, some of the co-governance, or some of the examples put forward by the National Party yesterday of initiatives that they support have elements of co-governance within them. So if we think about, kura kaupapa, for example, the wānanga, even whanaora, there's elements of co-governance within that.
I believe Mr. Hipkins knows exactly what co-governance is. Okay, you need to read my book very carefully, because co-governance is really ultimately about the elite Maori takeover of New Zealand. And it's very clear. They haven't hidden it. They've said by 2040 they want to have complete control of New Zealand. So when Mr. Hipkins gives all these sort of statements about co-governance that he doesn't, it means different things to different people, he's being very evasive, he's telling lies. He knows what co-governance is, and if he's a Prime Minister that doesn't know what his Cabinet's up to and what the Maori caucus is up to, he shouldn't be the Prime Minister. Agreed? Yes or no? That's absolutely true. So we have a huge problem with our Prime Minister because I believe he's lying, right? So let's see what Mr. Luxon says.
Co-governance has been messily handled and explained by this government because they haven't been upfront on such a big constitutional issue. They haven't taken people with them, and as a consequence become increasingly divisive across New Zealand.
What do you mean by the conversation has been immature around co-governance?
Well, it has been. It's been immature and divisive because essentially the Prime Minister hasn't come forward, spent her huge political capital making the case to the New Zealand people and taking them with her on it, and then having a decent debate and discussion about it. We've been calling for a decent discussion about it.
So that's Mr. Luxon. Now, I went to Shane Reti at the Dargaville Field Day, and I said to him, is National against co-governance or for that? Where do they stand with co-governance? And he said, we're totally against co-governance. National is totally against co-governance. And I said, hang on a minute. Your leader, Mr. Luxon, just said last week that he was for co-governance. He was for co-governance when it was to do with rivers and lakes and natural resources, but he was very against co-governance with social services like hospitals and police and schooling and so forth. He said they should be separate. So I said, what do you think of that? And he goes, that's what I meant. He's totally against. Mr. Luxon is totally against co-governance with respect to social services. But the thing is that Mr. Luxon changes his view every week on what he thinks about co-governance and how much he's going to have and how much he's not going to have. So you never know quite where they stand at the moment. And we've got a problem with that. All right, so in the late 1930s, Germany was taking over countries by declaring war against them. Is that not true, yes or no? Yes, it is. It's absolutely true. In turn, other countries like Britain and America declared war on Germany. Is that true, yes or no? Yes, it's true. So Germany was being helped by countries like Italy and Japan. In other words, Germany had allies. A group of people are trying to take over our country too. Is that true, yes or no? Yes, they are. I mean, the evidence is everywhere. I shouldn't have to say, people go, is that happening? You go, let me think about it. Yes, it's everywhere. You can see it. There's evidence everywhere. So what would you call this? If a group of people was taking over your country, what would you call that? You call it a coup, but what else would you call it? Well, I've said this. What would you describe what's happening? I've said New Zealand is actually in a war. There's a war going on for the nation called New Zealand. There are people who are wanting to take it over from the people who legally own it. That's what Germany did. That's what they did in the Second World War and the First World War. And so we have a war happening here. So who are the parties in this war? Well, it's a war between tribal representatives, private tribal companies, or elite Maori and the rest of New Zealand. Sometimes they're called treatyists. Elite Maori or treatyists are a distinct group, maybe 1,000 in number. They do not represent all Maori or the vast majority of Kiwis. I have friends who are Maori. And they don't want co-governance. I have people coming up to me on the road. My car's very well signed. And people coming up to me saying, I'm with you, give me a hug, a Maori person. Tribal leaders are feathering their own nests out of nothing but to further their own self-interests. If they're not stopped, New Zealand is headed to becoming the Zimbabwe of the South Pacific. So we're differentiating between the average, the ordinary Maori on the street and there's many good, hard-working Maori who I really admire and I like, and they're my friends. We're talking about a very small group at the top of Maoridom who are fleecing the country and who are designed to take it over. We're at war with them, not all Maori. Make that clear. So who else are we at war with? We're at war with the media. Here's the Public Interest Journalism Fund, $55 million. Now let me just give you some background to this. When COVID came to New Zealand, media outlets really struggled to survive. They had ongoings like leases and power and wages, but basically business stopped. And so their debt level just started to rise over those 2 years. Now at the end of those 2 years, many of them were on the verge of shutting down because they just had too much debt. So the government came up with this very cunning scheme. It was very cunning and it was very tricky and it was very wrong. And they said, we can give you some free money out of this $55 million fund. And the New Zealand Herald took $1 million. And you can have this, but there are conditions. If you want some money from the $55 million fund, you have to sign up to a contract. And this was the framework for the contract. It said this. These are the actual words from page 3 of the contract media outlets must sign if they want money. The Public Interest Journalism Fund must achieve all of these. They must actively promote the principles of partnership. You have to say that Maori and the Crown are in partnership via the Treaty of Waitangi. That's what you've got to say. You also have to acknowledge that Maori is a Tītariti partner with the Crown. Now, as well, point 3, it's called participation and active protection under Te Tītari o Waitangi. Participation. So what that means is this, is media must protect 1 and 2 from being attacked or opposed. So if anybody comes up and starts saying that we're not in partnership, Maori are not in partnership with the Crown, and Maori are not in partnership in point 2, then you must oppose them. If you're a newspaper, if you're a TV station or a radio station, you've got to start saying things against them. That's why I'm getting such a hard time. There's only 2 media outlets in New Zealand who have not signed up to this. One is like the Westport News, I think it is, and Sean Plunket and The Platform. Everybody else has signed a contract to do what I'm just about to describe to you here. Now, the contract further states, Maori have never ceded sovereignty to Britain or any other state. If you want money from this fund, you have to say that Maori have never ceded sovereignty to Britain or any other state. You must also say that our society has a foundation of institutional racism. How many of you seen that in newspapers, radios, and so on? Have you seen that? Yes, written and spoken. We live in a society that perpetuates racism and inequities. You must say that in your newspaper, your TV station, and your radio. In response, many Maori organisations and networks are decolonising. So you've got to say that decolonisation is good and that the country should be decolonising. So if you signed up to this, the $55 million Public Interest Journalism Fund, this is what you must be saying or not saying, or these are the people that you must be attacking. So here is an example. We've been on TV3 News quite a bit, well I have, and here, this was a TV3. This is how the media is fighting us. I wanted to give you an example. Watch how this media report is manipulated to create an alarming impression. The person who's the star of this is somebody called Michaela Matenga. She's a young Maori lady, and the media is collaborating with her. Now, everywhere we've been, the media has collaborated with the activists. And why is that? It's because of the $55 million Public Interest Journalism Fund. They've been paid to. They've been paid to be the helpers of the activists.
Scenes in the North Auckland township of Orewa last night, with police having to separate protesters from attendees. The meeting didn't get violent, but comes at a time when the term co-governance is controversial and there are still 42 more events planned. Tia McDougall reports.
Chanting no in the faces of Maori protesters. Supporters of the anti-co-governance roadshow didn't hold back when confronted by those opposing the meeting. The roadshow is organised by this man, Julian Batchelor, who wants to spread his stance on co-governance.
It's illegal. It's based on a fraudulent interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi.
However, he's often met with protesters. Yesterday's were from local iwi, Ngā Tū Manuhiri, and members of the Te Herenga Waka o Orewa Marae.
The protesters don't know what a racist is, and they don't know what the Treaty of Waitangi is.
From being there, I could tell that the attendees were fearful and they were worried and they were misinformed.
I didn't expect it to be what it was. There was about 20 to 30 police officers there.
Authorities kept the peace, but insults were still exchanged.
He said, what was it? You're horrible. And then he followed up by saying, and you probably stink as well.
Okay. How would you describe the behaviour of some of your supporters?
Oh, my supporters were fantastic. They were amazing. Sometimes they're a little bit conservative.
But supporters are not enough. Batchelor wants his message known at the Beehive.
I've had political parties talk to me. I'm not prepared to say who they are. I'm trying to get 100,000 people to the Auckland Domain just before the election to send that message to all the political parties.
A message to end co-governance. It's a touchy subject for some politicians, but not all.
We've been really clear that actually not just co-governance, but tino rangatiratanga for Māori and iwi and hapu is of benefit to all of us as a founding kaupapa of this country.
For now, there are 42 more events planned on the roadshow. Supporters, protesters and police likely preparing to be at all of them. Tia McDougall, News Hub.
Who was the little star of that show? It was that lady who came on and said, what did she say? She said, the man told me I stank and that I was horrible and that I probably stank as well. Now, we had a secret camera in that Orewa event, and what you're about to see is that beautiful, pretty little Maori lady girl and what she was up to. She was going around the room picking up books like this that we put out there free for people who came, and she was picking them up and ripping them up and throwing them around. She was vandalising all our property, so we caught this on camera. She's picking up books on the seats and she's ripping them up. Here we go, watch. There she is, ripping them up, right there. And this is the man who said, you're horrible and you probably stink. This is the man who tried to stop her. The TV didn't show any of that. He was doing the right thing, trying to stop her from vandalising all our books. You get it? And then, watch how the police do this. So he's trying to stop her, and then the police are right there. There's the cop watching her. He'd been watching her ripping up the books. He did nothing. And then she goes back to her little side of the room where she carries on. There's the books, look. And the policeman's right there. So, that is what we are facing. Everywhere we go, we have the media against us. Okay, that's a little cartoon that I got about TVNZ, likes, camera, fiction. So when you watch the news on 6 o'clock, that's what you're getting pretty much. All right, my big question to Maori is this: where are all the good Maori in New Zealand? Why are they not stepping up to condemn the appalling behaviour of their own people? Why are these Maori out here today where are the good Maori telling these protesters to go home and to respect free speech and people who've come to have a meeting? Where are they? I'll tell you why they don't turn up in a minute. Many Maori have come to me privately to say they're ashamed of the protesters and their shocking behaviour. They say they're a blight on Maoridom. The really good Maori in New Zealand, and there are many, say there is no place in New Zealand for bullying, intimidation, harassment, and denying other people the right to free speech. Good Maori are against co-governance. The reason they don't go public in their views? Well, it's because they too will be intimidated and bullied by the shameful thugs, their own people. I have a guy who's the Tāne Tapuna. He's one of the chief Ngāpui in Northland. He won't put his head up. He sent me an email soon after I got started, and he said to me, I thought, he said, I'm a Ngāpui elder, and I went, this is going to be my first death threat, and it wasn't. And he said, I am 100% behind you, and anything I can do to help. He said, I can't go public because I'm too well known, and he said, I will attract attention from the mongrel mob. Wow. And so, gangs, yeah. So gangs were going to get him if he started coming out publicly in support of me. The gangs haven't got me, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Okay, so we have the media, we have history-ignorant politicians that we're battling with. This is the star of the ignorant politicians, because we have politicians who are travelling around New Zealand saying ridiculous things.
But from the perspective of ratepayers, do you accept this model is not strictly a one-person, one-vote model?
Yes. The proportion of mana whenua is higher than the proportion of the population.
Do you accept that that is not a strictly democratic model?
There are provisions in our laws around the treaty that aren't democratic. Co-governance of the Wanganui and Waikato River, for example. There are provisions that we have in this country that wouldn't stand up to a purely academic democratic framework. But that's not how we work in New Zealand. We recognise that this country was founded on a treaty that gives Maori particular rights and interest in certain things, and what we're proposing here, we believe, recognises that and complies with what previous court rulings have been. We've moved a long way as a country. It's a journey that we're still part way through, but recognising that the democratic system of this country was based on a promise, on a contract, I think that it's on the Crown to observe those obligations and commitments that it made.
Okay, that's what he said. So I analysed what he said, and in 1 minute and 9 seconds, he made 10 breaches of the treaty, and here they are. He said the proportion of mana whenua on councils is higher than the general population. Quote, the treaty guarantees all New Zealanders equality. If people want to be a city councillor, they must be voted on, period. Right? Not appointed. Is that true, yes or no? Yes. Absolutely true. The second breach, he says there are provisions in our laws that are not democratic. Well, just because undemocratic laws, bad laws exist, does not make them right. Bad law must be repealed to restore democracy. That is, to restore treaty obligations. If we want to go back to the treaty, which is what all Maori and elite Maori are saying, then it's got to be two ways. If there's bad law and there's law at the moment that is treating people unequally, then it needs to be repealed. Yes or no? Yes. Come on, you guys have got to get a bit animated with me, because that's the truth. It must be repealed just because it exists. Breach number 3, our country, he says, was founded on a treaty which gives Maori rights, particular rights and interest in certain things. No, it doesn't, Mr. McAnulty. Maori ceded sovereignty in the treaty and became British citizens. The treaty guarantees equal rights for all. No group is to have special rights under the treaty. Everywhere you see some group in our country getting special rights, that's evidence of apartheid. It's evidence of racism. Is that true, yes or no? Yes. It is true, because we're all supposed to be equal, treated equally. Number 4, he says there are provisions which we have in this country which would not stand up to a strictly academic democratic framework. That's not how we work in this country. Oh, really? Wrong. The British established democratic government in New Zealand via the treaty. Any talk of any other form of government is a breach of the treaty. In fact, if some group of people is trying to take over the country, the duly elected government, what would you call that? That's called treason. That's treason. But somehow it's okay in 2023. Breach number 5, he says, what we are doing complies with our previous court rulings, what previous court rulings have been. Wrong. The treaty speaks for itself. How many have read the treaty? Okay, it's extremely simple and it's very hard to get it wrong. The treaty speaks for itself. It's so clear. We don't have to rely on Justice Cook, who was an activist judge, to tell us that the treaty was akin to a partnership. Activists got hold of that, grabbed it and said, oh, we're in partnership. They took a leap from what Mr. Cook said. We shouldn't do that. We should let the treaty speak for itself. Treaty breach number 6, quote, the democratic system of our country was based on a promise, that's the treaty he's talking about, on a contract, that's the treaty. I think that it's on the Crown to observe those obligations and commitments that it made. You know, he's 100% correct about that. What were those commitments and promises? Well, one law for all. Equality before the law and all the 160 cultures living here.
Chiefs and families thereof.
Just wait. The establishment of a strictly democratic government. Racial harmony, Hobson said as each chief signed at Waitangi on the 6th of February. Hei iwi tahi tātou, which is we are now one people. We're not two, Mr. McAnulty. There are no special rights, privileges, handouts for any racial group in the treaty. Protection of personal property rights was given in the treaty. Conclusion, McAnulty is breathtakingly ignorant with respect to the treaty. And he's a senior minister in the government. So we're at war also with Maori activists. You know, every single week, sometimes daily, I get an email from a Maori activist who gives me what he's written. And he said, I'm putting this out to all Maori everywhere, and it's full of absolute nonsense with respect to the treaty. Going on and on about they never signed ceded sovereignty. Going on and on about the treaty gives them the right to their own self-government in New Zealand. And on it goes. So we're fighting activists. Here's one. Here's an activist. He's one of the worst. This is what he says.
Is racism.
I have to say this. If you read Article 3 of the treaty in Te Reo Māori, nā tikanga reo kihitahi.
She then mistranslates.
It says that everyone has equal rights and duties under the law.
Relying on the public not speaking Te Reo Māori, treaty denialists often pretend that Article 3 erases Māori rights. The document itself is very clear. Article 1. Māori give the Crown the right to govern British settlers. At this time, there were 80,000 self-governing Māori and 2,000 settlers with no government. Article 2 affirms that Māori retain their sovereignty and Māori agree to only sell land to the Crown. In return, the Crown agrees in Article 3 to give Māori the same rights as British subjects. Māori and the British both govern themselves under the protection of the Queen. Te Tiriti o Waitangi grants neither side authority to rule the other. Lying about that is racist because it seeks to maintain colonial control at the expense of our rights to self-determination.
Okay, so when the public sees that, it sort of sounds, he sounds quite, like he's sure, he's quite confident, and it's sort of got a ring of, it's got to be right. True? Right? Well, watch what this is. It's complete heresy, if you like. It's Treaty of Waitangi heresy. In 1 minute, 19 seconds, he tells 10 lies and he tells 2 truths. And here they are. No one has ever said the treaty erases Maori rights. The opposite is true. It gives Maori the same rights as everyone else. Via the treaty, everyone became a British citizen, including Maori. Lie number 2. He implied that if you don't speak Maori, you can't understand the treaty. Not true. You just have to read the Littlewood draft, and I'm going to go into that draft in a minute. You're going to love that. Shall I tell you just quickly what that is? You have the treaty in Maori, which is the treaty that I support, that I want to see everybody obeying. I'm not anti-treaty. I'm saying let's go back to the original treaty in Maori. That treaty in Maori, over this hand here, was formulated and written as a result of an English draft. And that draft, this one here, was given to a lawyer called Henry Littlewood after the treaty. Thank you very much. This is I've got the dictionary, the Maori dictionary from Henry Williams, who was the translator of the treaty. I had to fight hard for that. Okay, I wanted that book because I wanted to know what the wording was in the original. So if you want to know, in other words, if you want to know what the treaty in Maori says, you just read the Littlewood draft, because they're exact mirror image. And I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. Line number 3, Maori gave the Crown the right to govern British settlers. Oh, really? So you have Maori are described in all the history books as sort of Stone Age people. When the colonists arrived here, they didn't have even shoes, they hadn't even invented a wheel. They were fighting each other, they were self-annihilating, they were marked by slavery, infanticide, and cannibalism. And to think that they would say to the Queen, we give you permission to govern the settlers only, but not us. No, that's not how it rolled to the greatest country in the world. No, Maori ceded sovereignty. Then he says, line number 4, there were 80,000 self-governing Maori in New Zealand in 1840. No, Maori were self-annihilating, just like I've said. Cannibalism, slavery, and infanticide were rife. There was no unifying Maori government, only tribes at war. It was Maori who came to the British wanting a treaty to save them from themselves and the French. Did you know that? It's Maori who came to the British and said, we want your help. The French are coming. They will wipe us off the map. And we're wiping each other off the map. They went down from 150,000 in 1840 to 70,000 in 1800. They were 150,000, went down to 70,000 in 1840. Their population had halved, and it was Maori fighting Maori. Maori gave the Crown the right to govern British settlers. No, Maori ceded sovereignty. Line number 6, Article 2, Maori retained the sovereignty. No, Maori ceded sovereignty. True statement. He says something true. Article 2, Maori agreed to only sell land to the Crown. That is true. True statement number 2, the treaty agreed to give Maori the same rights as British subjects. That's true. So he has 2 truths in there. But he's back to the lies in number 7. Maori and the British both govern themselves. No, Maori agreed to be governed by the British. It's one government, not 2. Lie number 8. The treaty gives neither side the authority to rule the other. That's alarming. Maori ceded sovereignty. Number 9. He says, lying about the treaty breach 8 is racist. In other words, if you say that Maori ceded sovereignty, you're a racist. And you're a liar. In other words, if you say Maori ceded sovereignty in the treaty, you're a liar and a racist, and you are supporting colonial control. No, Maori ceded sovereignty. We have to be strong with these guys and stick to the truth. Conclusion, this activist is leading my Maori, friends of mine, away from the truth and into lies and misinformation. As such, he is damaging Maori via his ignorance of the treaty. That's what's happening here. So in this war, we're fighting activists. Then he goes on to number 10, if you say Maori didn't cede sovereignty, you are undermining the rights of Maori to self-determination. No, that's not true. Currently, Maori have the same rights as everyone else to self-determination. In fact, they have more rights. By self-determination, we mean each individual person, regardless of race, has the right to choose a path in life and go for it. Is that not true, yes or no? Is that true, yes or no? Do we all have the same right to go for it for any career? If you want to be a plumber, an electrician, a nurse, or whatever you want to be, we're trying to make it equal for everybody, yes? You can self-determine. But that's not what he means. By self-determination, we do not mean Maori setting up their own country and government within New Zealand. For this, they have no right. This is tribal rebellion. This is treason, and therefore a glaring breach of the treaty. It must be stopped. Who else are we at war with? Government departments, which are now run by activists. I'll just give you quickly my own background. I bought a beautiful piece of land in Rafiti, which is in the Bay of Islands, 3.5 acres, and it was in the middle of the most staunch Maori community in New Zealand. And that tells you that I'm not a racist, because I moved in with the biggest Maori community in the country back in 2008. It was in 3 lots, and I thought, I'm going to sell one lot of my land because I want to have no mortgage. Bailey's was the agency. They put up a sign. Within an hour, it was chopped down with an axe. Then I got a call from the police. The police said, Mr. Batchelor, you better call off the auction, because Maori and Rafiti have said that if you sell that piece of land, they're going to come to the Auckland auction rooms, and they're going to smash up the auction rooms. So it's become a security issue. You need to call the auction off. I thought, oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? So between 2008 and 2015, we sort of had Palestine and Israel sort of a cold silence. And I'd wave to Maori. We'd give them fridges and appliances and implements and all kinds of things, and you were invisible. They wouldn't say anything to you. They were terribly racist. I've got to tell you. 2015, it's New Year's Eve. My phone goes off. I'm in Auckland, and my house was rented out to 3 South African families, women and children. The phone goes off at 2 a.m. and there's a sound of screaming and shouting and smashing glass. There's a home invasion happening. They're smashing all the windows. Kids are wetting their beds. It's chaos. I put on my clothes. I went straight up there. Police didn't arrive till 9 in the morning. And I saw some of the people in the community. I went around and I said, what did you do that for? They said, your land was stolen from us. And I said, why didn't you come and see me? Why didn't you just come and talk to me? Why did you terrorise women and children? Why did you cause all that damage? That's the Maori way. That's tribal rule. So they caused 10 grand's worth of damage, and so I went away and I wrote a book as thick as this on the history of the land. I found out that my land was sold outright by a Maori family in 1937 to a school teacher who was a teacher in the community for 17 years. His name was Thomas Thompson. The land sale went through the Maori Land Court. It actually went through the government. It was a bulletproof sale. My book has all the source documents. The foreword was written by Dr. Paul Moon, who's Professor of History at AUT. He said it's a fine piece of research and I can commend it. I've had senior Maori ring me and say, we've read that book, we can't fault it, that land's yours. So I said to the Maori in Rafiti, you were wrong and you caused $10,000 worth of damage. You need to write to those 3 families that you terrorised and gave them a terrible experience of New Zealand, and you owe me $10,000. It's now 2023, I had nothing. We even know who did it. The police won't investigate. Fast forward to 2018, we're putting up a retaining wall on my property. A Maori lady comes up the driveway and she says, I want my land back. And I said, you need to go and read my book because it's not your land. This land was purchased by me, it's freehold land. She grabbed hold of me, there was a camera behind me, 1080 HD with perfect sound. She got hold of me and I thought, if I do something to her, rough her up, I'm going to be the villain. And so she raked her arms down, her fingernails down my arms. There was blood all down my both arms. We took the footage to the police. They said, we've been wanting to get her for a while. We're going to charge her with assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. We went to court. Judge looked at her and he goes, put his gravel down. I'm going to let you off. She walks out. She goes back to Rafiti. Hey, bro, I got let off. No consequences. So all this while, I have an anti-tribal rule, because that's what they tried to do to me. They tried to get me to submit to tribal rule, building in me. Then in last year, 2022, another Maori lady came up the driveway and she says, can I have some time with you? And I said, sure. She said, when she arrived, I said, what have you come for? We had a bit of small talk. I said, what have you come for? She said, I'm just going to cut to the chase. If you don't give us your land, we're going to burn your house down. So I said, I stayed calm, and I had my cell phone recording everything. Everything. Because I thought, you just got to do that now. I had my cell phone was recording. And this conversation went on for 40 minutes. I said, why should I give that to you? She said, just because we want it. I said, I've worked all my life for that bit of land. Why should I give it to you? We want it. I said, well, you can't have it unless you buy it. It's the normal way to get land. They didn't accept that, so anyway, after 40 minutes, the conversation finished. She went away. I gave the footage to the police. It went round from one inspector to the other, from one policeman to the other, and the policeman comes back and says, I'm sorry, Julian, we can't charge her because she didn't say, I am going to burn the house down. She said, we are. You've got to nail it at one person. Then last year was the thing that tipped me into doing what I'm doing today, which is fighting against co-governance, because I've had 14 years in the most staunch Maori community in this country. They've tried to break me last year. I got from Heritage New Zealand, I got a letter in the mail saying, we have just reclassified your land as wahi tapu, sacred Maori land. Your land now is controlled by Maori. You pay the rates still, but Maori have control. That's a fact. I said, no way. I had a pencil in my hand when I read that letter, and I snapped it. And I threw it like that away, and I said, I'm mobilising. That's it. They've pushed me over the edge. I'm getting going. I started a website, and just before I made that website live, the good book says no man builds a tower without counting the cost. And I said, this could get really nasty when I put this website live because my name's all over it. They know where I live even. So I said this to myself, okay, what am I prepared to lose? They could burn my house down. Am I prepared to give that up? Yep. If they called me tomorrow and they said, I'm sorry, Mr. Batchelor, your house has been burnt down, I'd say, okay, I counted the cost, that's no problem. Then I thought, the second thing they could do is they could kill me. Yeah? And I thought, how would I feel about that? And I went, you know what? I'm okay about that. I'm okay about that. You know why? The good book says this. Don't fear him who can kill the body. Fear him who can kill both body and soul in hell. And as soon as that came into my mind, I went, right, the website's going live. They've got no power over me. As soon as I gave up everything, they've got no power. I had unbelievable fearlessness came in. At Orewa, I walked through 50 protesters, didn't feel any fear whatsoever. Because if you've got something that they can get, they've got power over you. Many businessmen around here will say, I don't want to mobilise in case they find out about my business. I don't want to go public in case they find out da. I understand that. I get that. But you become friggin' dangerous when you let it all go. You become unstoppable because you've got no fear. We're at war with activism in the education system, the brainwashing of young people at kindergartens right up to university, even starting at kindies. I was talking to somebody who had a little coffee shop. She said she takes her 2-year-old into a creche while she works in the shop, and she said she's getting a bit alarmed about the number of little words that her little daughter's coming back with Maori words that she's being taught. And it's coming, and it's going right through kindergartens, right up to university schools, high schools, intermediate schools, primary schools. There is a massive brainwashing campaign going on. European lawyers and consultants who have sold their soul and our country for filthy lucre. There's many, many European lawyers and consultants who are making a fortune out of the Treaty of Waitangi gravy train. Activism in local councils. I'm in contact with local councillors. One local council said they had a 3-day cultural safety session in their council, and 3 sort of Maori experts came in trying to brainwash everybody, and the speakers had body cams on. The speakers had body cams on to take footage of anybody who was maybe causing any trouble in the council meetings. This is North Korea. Christian churches, I'm at war with them. How many Christians in this room? Okay, a few. Okay, might as well be a Christian meeting. Christian churches which have become woke and PC, all the while thinking that in running with co-governance they're putting a smile on the face of God. They are not. I've been trying to get into Christian churches. They won't let me in to speak. You know why? Because they're saying we're a bicultural. Churches are now bicultural. I say to them, you're not. This is a multicultural country. We have 160 cultures here. You should be fighting for all people. Is God only for Maori or for everybody? Come on, is he for everybody or just for Maori? He's for everybody. We're also at war with the laid-back nature of European Kiwis, whose mantra is she'll be right. Until they taste tribal rule, and then tears will flow in the gutters of our streets. Do you know what? I've thought about this. I've been in Rafiti, my town, for 14 years to experience tribal rule, to tell you what's coming. It is hell. I live in the most beautiful part of New Zealand, but tribal rule all around, and I tell you, I don't want that for anybody. We're fighting for the average Maori and for 159 other cultures in this country, and here they are. Indians, Africans, Chinese, Russians, Czechs, Japanese, Samoans, French, Australians, Tongans, Germans, Croatians, the British, South Americans, Koreans, South Africans, Italians, Nueans, Filipinos. Are these all taxpayers, yes or no? Yes. Do they all deserve to be treated equally, yes or no? Yes. Absolutely they do. Because we are all equal. There should be no special group. Here's Tipene O'Regan. He's an elite Maori. He said this, or rather it was said of him, Sir Tipene O'Regan has been known to hint that if Ngāi Tahu and other claims before the Waitangi Tribunal are not met, there is a danger that Maori activists may resort to violence to achieve their objectives. That's a statement of war. Ken Mayer, leader of the militant Te Ahi Kaha group, said this, we will take back our country by any means. Notice that everything that I quote comes out of a book, and it tells you the publisher, the author and the page. So it's all academically referenced. I'm not making any of this up. The Māori Party has clear goals. Here's Waititi. They have a 25-year plan. They want self-management, self-determination and self-governance over all their domains. That means education, health, prisons, everything. They want a completely separate country. They want a separate Maori parliament with 15 to 17 seats and control over $20 billion of annual self-managed spending. They want the abolishing full and final treaty settlements. They want handing back of all conservation land. There's the source. Who's going to pay the 20 billion? Us. That's a billion's 1,000 million. They want 20,000 million a year from the tax take. A year. Every year. Do you know how much the Dunedin Hospital cost to build? 1.4 billion. Do you know how much the road from Puhoi to Warkworth cost? $1 billion. You could have 20 of those roads. Stuart C. Scott is a lawyer and a historian. He said this, claiming has become an integral part of the Maori way of life. The thought of the extinction of further claiming rights by final settlement is abhorrent to the race. Maoridom does not want settlement. It wants to nurse its grievances and continue its claiming ad infinitum. By the push for tribal leaders for co-governance and partnership, if not stopped, is going to destroy New Zealand. So what is co-governance? Let's go through this very quickly. You've come here to learn about co-governance, and I want to teach you about it. It means this, 2 complete governments that overlap. By the way, I've chosen Nanaia Mahuta here because she was one of the architects of the Hei Puapua report. They want a new written constitution based on a new interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi. How can you have a new interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi? It says what it says. You can't have a new one, a new interpretation. At least 5% of all procurement contracts must now go to Maori businesses. All government departments, agencies must now provide a report that show at least 5% of the procurement of goods and services was from Maori businesses. What do you call that? It's apartheid. For media, we've been over this, specific guidelines for the media. They set up the $55 million Public Interest Journalism Fund. If media outlets want a slice of this fund, they have strict conditions. You cannot present a point of view that opposes the government's race-based agenda. News must cover stories that support the government-approved narrative. Maori language and culture are now being forced into government departments, local authorities and state-funded media. The problem we have is this. That journalism fund had a clause in it that if you did not meet a threshold of Maori content, they could recall your loan. So say you borrowed $1 million and you got out of debt. They could be monitoring your TV station and saying you haven't got enough Maori content. If you don't up it, we're going to want that $1 million back. Why do you think suddenly in TV1, TV3, you suddenly saw the presenters, Dallo and others, suddenly speaking Maori? They'd signed up. Why do you think TV3 had a lady with a moko on here and TV weather lady? Because doubtless she'd been rung by these guys saying you need to have more Maori content on your TV station. Get a Maori weather presenter. Otherwise, we will call your loan. That's apartheid. Dock and land, the transfer and ownership and control of the entire conservation state to tribal authorities. The Department of Conservation has now formed Option Development Group, which is basically how to transfer all dock land to Maori. This group has made a recommendation to give full control and governance of dock to Maori. Government rezones privately owned land and gives rights over it to Maori. Now, when you go to the beach, shortly, when you go to the beach or you go to a forest or a lake or a river, you're going to pay an iwi toll. If they get all the land. The Waitangi tribunals just produced a report like the Auckland Telephone book saying that all the state land in Northland's got to be given back to Maori. All of it. It's apartheid. What about education? Rewriting New Zealand's history, skipping the Musket Wars and pre-Maori history, showing pre- and post-European Maori is different from what was observed and recorded by early Europeans, teaching critical race theory. Maori are good, white people are bad. I don't want my daughter coming home going, Daddy, I want to be a Maori, because it's awful being a white person at school. Teaching racial bias, teaching primary school children without Maori ancestry to feel ashamed. What is that? That's apartheid. That's what's happening. Health. 2 healthcare systems, Maori healthcare system funded by the taxpayer, decision-making and veto rights over the entire health system. Maori patients prioritised. That's apartheid. What does it mean for justice? 2 justice systems, a Maori court system where offenders with Maori ancestry will be treated differently from other offenders. 2 jail systems, Maori jails where inmates with a Maori ancestry were treated differently from other inmates. Western common law replaced by tikanga. People of Maori ancestry were given greater legal rights. What do we call that? It's apartheid. You know what? We used to be the country in the world that was fighting against apartheid in the 1970s and 80s. Now we're the proponents of it. We're pushing it like no other country in the world. What's happening? Water. Granting Maori rights to all fresh water. Councils pay for Maori for water. Water costs and rates will go up. Giving Maori funding to cover all legal costs to claim the seabed and foreshore from mean high tide out to 12 nautical miles. Opponents to Maori must find their own legal costs. It's apartheid. What does it mean for local councils? Iwis have decision-making and veto rights. Veto means they have the final say. The abolition of the right of local communities to hold a binding referendum on Maori ward seats on councils. Local Government Minister Mahuta is now undertaking a review, and it appears likely to lead to 50% of the council seats being held by Maori. Not elected, appointed. It's apartheid. Is all of this constitutional? Or is it a coup? To answer these questions, we've got to go back to the Treaty of Waitangi, which has become, rightly or wrongly, our country's founding document. Now, I want you to have a little stand up, because we've been going an hour. I want you to stand up and have a little jiggle around. Okay? Just have a little break for a second, because we need to just keep you fresh for what's coming. Because I'm going into the Treaty of Waitangi. So I need to have you really fresh for that.